The lunchroom in D Block buzzed with noise. Trays clattering, laughter echoing, guards barely watching. Then the door opened. Every head turned. The new inmate, a black woman, quiet, cuff marks still fresh on her wrists, stepped inside, holding her tray like it might shield her from the stares. "Yo, look what they sent us!" A man at the corner table sneered. Big guy, tattoos up his neck. The kind of predator who smiled before he struck. He looked her up and down, then nudged his buddy. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You lost your ladies' block?" The cafeteria roared with laughter. She said nothing, just kept walking. That silence, it irritated him. He stood up, towering over her. "Don't ignore me." When she didn't answer, he grabbed her tray and tipped the garbage bin straight onto her food. Cold soup, rotten scraps, and cigarette ash spilled across the table. The crowd howled. She didn't, just stared at the mess, and then, slowly, at him. He didn't like the look in her eyes, so he did the only thing a coward knows how to do. He kneed her hard, right in the face. The crack echoed. She fell. The room went dead silent. But then, she moved, not with anger, but precision. She wiped the blood from her lip, stood up, and in one single motion flipped his weight against the table. The sound of bones hitting steel cut through the silence. No one spoke. No one laughed. The guards froze, unsure if they'd just witnessed self-defense or something else entirely. She looked down at the man gasping on the floor and said quietly, "You should have stayed seated." Later, the block would learn who she really was. A former military hand-to-hand instructor, wrongly imprisoned for defending someone who couldn't fight back. But that part comes later. Stay with me until the end, because what happened after that fight revealed a secret the prison tried to bury. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The steel doors of Millbrook Correctional Facility had swallowed thousands of lives over the decades. Men mostly, hardened by years of violence and desperation. But today, those doors opened for someone different. Her name was Captain Maya Rodriguez, though nobody in that place would know her rank for quite some time. To them, she was just another number, another body to fill another cell. The intake process was the same humiliating ritual it had been for everyone who came before her. Strip search, standard issue orange jumpsuit, paperwork that reduced a human being to a file number. The processing officer barely looked up from his computer screen as he typed in the details. Another transfer from county jail. Assault charges. Standard stuff. What he didn't see in that file was the truth. Maya Rodriguez had served 3 tours overseas, trained elite soldiers in close-quarters combat, and earned more commendations than most officers see in a lifetime. She had dedicated her life to protecting others, which is exactly what had landed her in this concrete nightmare. 3 months earlier, Maya had been walking home from her job at a veterans counseling center when she heard screaming from an alley. A young woman was being attacked by 3 men. Maya didn't hesitate. She intervened, using exactly the right amount of force to neutralize the threat and save the victim. But the attackers had connections. Money. Lawyers who knew how to twist a story. By the time the media got hold of it, Maya was painted as the aggressor, a violent veteran who couldn't control her anger. The young woman she saved tried to testify on her behalf, but intimidation tactics and legal maneuvering silenced her voice. Maya's military record, her years of service, her spotless reputation, none of it mattered when the system decided she was guilty. The judge gave her 2 years. Her lawyer said she was lucky it wasn't more. Maya knew better than to call any of this lucky. Cell Block D was a world unto itself, governed by rules that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with survival. The guards who worked this section had long since given up on rehabilitation or reform. Their job was simple: keep the inmates alive until their sentences were up, and try not to get hurt in the process. The unofficial king of D Block was a man named Vincent Torres, though everyone called him Crusher. 6'4", 260 pounds of muscle and scar tissue, with arms like tree trunks and hands that had broken more bones than a car accident. He had been inside for 8 years on an aggravated assault charge, but his real crime was being born. Crusher ran with too much anger and not enough options his operation with brutal efficiency. He decided who ate and who went hungry. He determined which inmates got protection and which ones became prey. The guards looked the other way because Crusher kept order in his own twisted fashion, and that made their jobs easier. Better to have one man controlling the chaos than to deal with constant riots and violence. When word came down that a woman was being transferred to D Block, Crusher's interest was immediately piqued. In his 8 years inside, he had never seen a female inmate in the men's section. Overcrowding had forced some unusual housing situations, but this was unheard of. The warden must have been desperate, or maybe somebody had made a serious mistake in the paperwork. Either way, Crusher saw opportunity. A woman in a men's prison would be vulnerable, desperate for protection, willing to make deals that would expand his power and influence. He called a meeting with his inner circle that night, laying out the rules for how this would work. Maya's first night in D Block was spent listening to the sounds that would become her soundtrack for the next 2 years. Metal doors slamming, footsteps echoing down concrete corridors, men shouting, laughing, arguing, sometimes screaming. The occasional fight that ended with guards rushing in and someone getting dragged to solitary. Her cellmate was a thin, nervous man named Eddie who had been inside for 6 months on a burglary charge. He kept his head down, did his time quietly, and tried not to attract attention from anyone who might see him as easy prey. When Maya was assigned to his cell, Eddie didn't know what to think. "You really a woman?" he whispered after lights out, his voice barely audible in the darkness. "Last time I checked," Maya replied softly. "Man, this place is gonna eat you alive. You got any idea what you walked into?" Maya stared at the ceiling, where thin shafts of light from the corridor painted geometric patterns on the concrete. She had served in combat zones where death could come from any direction at any moment. She had trained soldiers to survive in hostile territory behind enemy lines. This was different, but it wasn't foreign. "I've got some idea," she said finally. The next morning brought Maya's first trip to the cafeteria, and Crusher was ready. He had positioned himself and his crew strategically throughout the room, making sure they controlled the flow of traffic and could see everything that happened. This was going to be a show, a demonstration of power that would establish the hierarchy from day one. Maya entered the cafeteria carrying herself with the same quiet confidence she had maintained since her arrival. She moved through the serving line, accepting the watery eggs and burnt toast without complaint, her eyes scanning the room with the practiced awareness of someone who had spent years in dangerous places. The conversations died as she walked. Every eye in the room followed her movement, measuring, evaluating, waiting to see what would happen next. She found an empty table near the middle of the room and sat down, apparently oblivious to the attention she was receiving. That's when Crusher made his move. "Well, well, well." His voice boomed across the cafeteria, causing the last few conversations to stop completely. "Look what they brought us, boys. Must be our lucky day." Maya continued eating, her expression unchanged, though every muscle in her body was coiled and ready. She had dealt with bullies before, in the military, and out. The principle remained the same: show no fear, but avoid unnecessary confrontation if possible. Crusher stepped directly into her path when she got up to bus her tray. His massive frame blocked the way to the dish return, his crew flanking him on both sides with grins spreading across their faces as they anticipated the entertainment. "I'm talking to you, sweetheart," Crusher said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "When somebody speaks to you in here, you answer. That's how respect works in my house." Maya stopped walking and looked up at him calmly. "I heard you," she said simply. "I just didn't have anything to say." The response caught Crusher off guard. Most new inmates either cowered in fear or tried to act tough to compensate for their terror. This woman was doing neither. She was just standing there, completely unimpressed by his display of intimidation. "You didn't have anything to say," Crusher repeated, his voice getting louder. "Maybe you don't understand how things work around here. See, I run this block. That means everything that happens here goes through me, including where some lost little girl gets to sit." Maya remained perfectly still, her breathing slow and controlled. Years of military training had taught her to find calm in the center of any storm. This was just another storm, no different from the ones she had weathered in places where the stakes were life and death. "I understand," Maya said quietly. "You're the man in charge. I'm just trying to eat my breakfast and mind my own business." Crusher's face flushed red with anger. The woman's calm was making him look weak in front of his crew, in front of the entire cafeteria, in a place where reputation was everything. That couldn't stand. Without warning, Crusher reached out and shoved Maya hard in the chest. The force should have sent her stumbling backward, maybe even knocked her down. But Maya's feet seemed rooted to the floor. She absorbed the impact, shifted her weight slightly, and remained standing exactly where she had been. Crusher blinked in surprise. He had put real force behind that shove, enough to move a man his own size. But this woman hadn't budged an inch. "Did you just?" Crusher started to say. But Maya cut him off with a look that made the gang leader's words die in his throat. For just a moment, her mask of calm slipped, and Crusher caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. It was like staring into the eyes of a predator that had been pretending to be prey. The moment stretched like a taut wire. Crusher stared into Maya's eyes and felt something he hadn't experienced in 8 years behind bars. Uncertainty. The woman's gaze held depths that spoke of training, discipline, and a quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what she was capable of. But Crusher was the king of D-Block, and kings don't back down from challenges, especially not from some woman who probably couldn't handle a real fight if her life depended on it. "You think you're tough, sweetheart?" Crusher snarled, stepping closer until he was towering over Maya. "You think whatever little self-defense class you took on the outside is gonna help you in here?" Maya's response was barely above a whisper. "I think you should let me finish my breakfast in peace." The cafeteria had gone completely silent now. Every conversation had stopped. Even the guards at the far end of the room had noticed something was happening, though they weren't moving to intervene. Not yet. They had learned long ago that sometimes it was better to let these things play out naturally was. Crusher's crew getting restless. They fed off their leader's energy, and right now that energy was building towards something explosive. One of them, a wiry man with prison tattoos covering his arms, stepped forward eagerly. "Crusher, you want me to teach the lady some manners?" he asked, cracking his knuckles. The anticipation in his voice was unmistakable, but Crusher held up a hand. This was personal now. The woman's calm was eating away at his authority with every second that passed. He needed to end this himself, decisively and brutally, in front of everyone who mattered. "Nah," Crusher said, never taking his eyes off Maya. "I got this one." What happened next would be talked about in whispers for months to come. Crusher drew back his massive right fist, putting every ounce of his 260 pounds behind a punch designed to shatter Maya's jaw. It was the kind of blow that had hospitalized men half his age, the kind that ended conflicts before they really began. Maya saw it coming from the moment Crusher's shoulder tensed. 15 years of military combat training had given her an understanding of body mechanics that went beyond conscious thought. The punch was powerful but telegraphed, thrown with emotion instead of technique. Time seemed to slow as Maya's body moved with fluid precision. Her left hand came up in a gentle arc, deflecting Crusher's punch just enough to send it harmlessly past her head. At the same moment, her right palm struck forward with surgical accuracy, connecting with a pressure point just below Crusher's sternum. The technique was called Iron's Breath, and Maya had spent years perfecting it. Applied correctly, It could disrupt breathing and send a man crashing to the ground without causing permanent damage. Applied with full force, it could stop a heart. Maya held back. Crusher's eyes went wide as the breath exploded from his lungs. His massive frame folded in on itself as he dropped to his knees, gasping like a fish out of water. The breakfast tray Maya had been holding clattered to the floor, spilling its contents across the concrete. The silence in the cafeteria was deafening. The wiry man and the rest of Crusher's crew stood frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Their invincible leader, the man who had ruled this block through fear and violence for nearly a decade, was on his knees in front of a woman who looked like she should be working in an office somewhere. Maya looked down at Crusher with something that might have been pity. "I asked you nicely," she said, her voice still calm and controlled. "All I wanted was to eat my breakfast." Crusher struggled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and rage. The humiliation burned worse than the pain in his chest. Every eye in the cafeteria was on him, waiting to see how the king would respond to being dethroned by someone he had dismissed as weak. "You," he wheezed, pointing a shaking finger at Maya, "are dead. You hear me? Dead!" But even as he made the threat, Crusher knew something fundamental had changed. The aura of invincibility that had protected him for so long had been shattered in front of everyone. Word would spread through every cell block by evening. The king had been brought low by a woman who barely came up to his chest. Maya picked up her spilled tray and walked calmly to the serving line to get a replacement meal. The inmates parted before her like water, their eyes following her every movement. Some looked at her with newfound respect, others with curiosity, and more than a few with the kind of fear they had once reserved for Crusher alone. As Maya found an empty table and sat down to eat, conversations slowly resumed around the cafeteria, but they were different now. Hushed, careful. The power structure that had governed D Block for years had been turned upside down in the span of 30 seconds. Crusher and his crew retreated to their usual corner, but the swagger was gone. They huddled together, speaking in low voices, planning their revenge. Because in a place like this, what had happened couldn't be allowed to stand. The woman had embarrassed Crusher in front of everyone, and that meant war. Maya ate her replacement breakfast methodically, seemingly oblivious to the storm gathering around her. But her awareness was absolute. She could feel the hostile stares, hear the whispered conversations, sense the violence building like pressure in a steam pipe. She had hoped to serve her time quietly, to keep her head down and count the days until her release. But decades of military service had taught her that some conflicts were unavoidable. When faced with a bully, you had two choices: submit or stand your ground. Maya Rodriguez had never been one to submit. After breakfast, as inmates filed out of the cafeteria, several men approached Maya. Some wanted to shake her hand. Others offered protection, sensing that aligning themselves with the woman who had humbled Crusher might be wise. A few even asked if she would teach them what she knew. Maya politely declined all offers. She had learned long ago that in places like this, trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Allies could become liabilities in an instant. But as she walked back to her cell, Maya knew that her quiet time was over. Crusher wouldn't let this slide, and when he made his move, it wouldn't be a fair fight in front of witnesses. It would be brutal, decisive, and designed to restore his reputation through Maya's destruction. The former military instructor had survived combat zones, faced down enemy soldiers, and trained some of the toughest fighters in the world. But this was different. This was their world, their rules, and she was vastly outnumbered. That evening, as Maya lay on her narrow bunk reading a worn paperback book, Eddie whispered across the darkness of their cell, "Is it true what everyone's talking about? What you did to Crusher?" Maya turned a page without looking up. "People say a lot of things. They're saying you're some kind of soldier, that you know how to kill people with your bare hands." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, lost in memories of a different life, training sessions that lasted until dawn, students who looked up to her with respect and admiration, a world where her skills were used to protect and serve, not to survive. I was a teacher, she said finally, for a very long time. What did you teach? Discipline, control, how to find strength in stillness. Eddie was quiet for a while, processing this information. Finally, he spoke again, his voice barely audible. Crusher's going to come for you. Him and his whole crew. They can't let what happened today stand. Maya stared up at the ceiling, where a thin shaft of light from the corridor painted geometric patterns on the concrete. She had known this moment would come from the instant she decided to defend herself in the cafeteria. The only question was when and how Crusher would make his move. I know, Maya said simply. Aren't you scared? Maya considered the question carefully. Fear was a natural response to danger, but it was also a choice. You could let it paralyze you, or you could acknowledge it and move forward anyway. Fear is just information, she said. It tells you to be prepared, but it doesn't have to control your actions. The next morning came with an unusual quiet that settled over D-Block like fog before a storm. Maya rose before the wake-up call, as was her habit from decades of early morning training sessions. She folded her blanket with precise corners and prepared for what she knew would be a very different kind of day. Eddie stirred on the bunk below, rubbing sleep from his eyes. You're already up? The body remembers discipline even when the mind wants to rest, Maya replied, straightening her orange jumpsuit. Today will require both. Word spread through the prison like wildfire about yesterday's incident. As Maya walked the corridors toward the showers, conversations stopped. Eyes followed her every step. Some inmates nodded with newfound respect. Others quickly looked away, not wanting to be associated with the woman who had humiliated Crusher. The shower room was nearly empty when Maya arrived, which suited her perfectly. She preferred solitude for her morning routine. The lukewarm water was a luxury in this place, and she let it run over her shoulders as she reflected on the path that had brought her here. As she dried off and dressed, Maya heard footsteps approaching, multiple sets of boots moving with purpose. She didn't turn around, but her reflection in the metal mirror showed her everything she needed to know. 3 men entered, spreading out in a semicircle, blocking the only exit. Their body language spoke of violence barely contained, of men eager to restore their leader's reputation through brutal action. "Morning, sweetheart," the leader said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Crusher wants to have a word with you." Maya continued buttoning her shirt, her movements unhurried. "I figured he might. Smart woman. See what happened yesterday? That was embarrassing for all of us. Made us look weak in front of the whole block. Can't have that." "I understand your position," Maya said calmly, "but I won't be going anywhere with you." The man's grin widened, revealing yellowed teeth. "Wasn't really asking, lady." The first attacker moved forward, reaching for Maya's arm. What happened next was so fast that the leader barely registered it. Maya pivoted on her back foot, her hand shooting out in a swift chopping motion that struck the attacker's wrist with surgical precision. The man cried out and stumbled backward, clutching his arm as feeling left his fingers. The second attacker rushed in from the side, swinging wildly. Maya ducked under the punch and drove her elbow upward into the man's solar plexus. The breath exploded from his lungs as he doubled over, gasping like a landed fish. The leader backed toward the door, his eyes wide with disbelief. 2 of Crusher's best enforcers had been eyed in less neutral than 10 seconds, by a woman who looked like she should be teaching school somewhere. "This ain't over," he snarled as he helped his injured companions to their feet. "Crusher's got plans for you. Big plans. Tell Crusher he knows where to find me," Maya replied, straightening her shirt once more. "I'll be in the library." The library was Maya's sanctuary in this concrete hell. Rows of worn books lined the walls, most donated by churches and community groups over the years. The selection was eclectic, ranging from romance novels to philosophy texts to technical manuals. Maya had found a corner table where she could sit with her back to the wall and a clear view of all entrances. The librarian was a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had worked at Millbrook for over 12 years. She had seen inmates come and go, witnessed violence that would haunt her dreams, but she had also seen moments. Something of genuine transformation about this elderly woman intrigued her. She was different from most of the men in here. "You speak like an educated person," Mrs. Patterson observed, as Maya returned a book on military history to the return slot. "What brought you to this place?" Maya selected her fingers over another book from the shelf, running the worn cover. "Poor choices and good intentions. The road to this place is paved with both." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of other inmates. Maya noticed them immediately. Men she didn't recognize from Crusher's usual crew. Hired muscle from other blocks, brought in to handle a problem that had grown beyond D Block's ability to solve internally. Mrs. Patterson sensed the tension immediately. "Perhaps you should go," she whispered to Maya. "I can call for guards." "No need," Maya replied softly. "This was always going to happen. Better here than somewhere with innocent people nearby." The hired muscle approached with the swagger of men accustomed to intimidating others through sheer presence. The leader was a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks and scars that spoke of countless violent encounters. They called him Tank, and his reputation preceded him through every cell block in the prison. "You must be the woman causing all the trouble," Tank said, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "Crusher sends his regards." Maya closed her book carefully and set it aside. "I suppose talking this through isn't an option." "Talking time's over, lady. You embarrassed the wrong man." The library erupted into chaos as other inmates scrambled for exits. Mrs. Patterson retreated behind her desk, reaching for the emergency button that would summon guards. But Maya knew that help wouldn't arrive in time. It never did when you needed it most. Tank moved with surprising speed for his size. His massive fist cut through the air toward Maya's head, but Maya wasn't there when the punch arrived. She had slipped to the side, her movement so smooth it seemed like she had simply faded from existence. The old woman's counterattack was swift and precise. Her palm struck Tank's kidney with enough force to drop a normal man, but the giant barely grunted. Years of prison violence had hardened him beyond normal human limits. Tank spun with a back fist that would have crushed Maya's skull if it connected. She rolled away from the blow, tumbling across the floor as Tank's fist splintered the wooden bookshelf where her head had been. The second attacker joined the fray, swinging a makeshift weapon fashioned from a toothbrush handle and razor blade. Maya caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted sharply, and heard the satisfying crack of breaking bone. The weapon clattered across the floor as its wielder collapsed, screaming, but Tank was relentless. He grabbed Maya in a bear hug, lifting the smaller woman off her feet and squeezing with enough force to crack ribs. Maya's vision began to blur as the air was crushed from her lungs. In that moment of crisis, Maya's training took over completely. She drove her thumbs into pressure points along Tank's arms, disrupting the nerve signals that controlled grip strength. The giant's hold loosened just enough for Maya to break free. Maya dropped to the floor and swept Tank's legs, sending the massive man crashing into a table that collapsed under his weight. Before Tank could recover, Maya was on him, her hand positioned at the giant's throat in a hold that could render him unconscious in seconds. "Yield," Maya said quietly, applying just enough pressure to make her point clear. Tank's eyes went wide with panic as he felt his air supply being cut off. He had never been in a position where his size and strength meant nothing, where technique and knowledge trumped brute force so completely. "I yield," he gasped. Maya immediately released the hold. The library fell silent, except for the groaning of injured men and the sound of approaching boots as guards finally arrived. "What happened here?" demanded Sergeant Williams, the head of security for D Block. "Disagreement over Jaka book," Maya replied calmly, straightening her torn shirt. It got out of hand. Williams looked around at the destruction, the injured inmates, and the elderly woman standing calmly in the center of it all. His experience told him there was more to this story, but prison politics were complicated. Sometimes it was better not to ask too many questions. Medical attention for the injured, Williams ordered his men. And you, he pointed at Maya. Solitary confinement? 48 hours? Maya nodded in acceptance. It was a small price to pay for sending a message that would echo through every cell block in the prison. The woman wasn't just dangerous. She was unstoppable. As guards escorted her away, Maya caught sight of Crusher watching from the corridor. The gang leader's face was a mask of rage and frustration. His hired muscle had failed spectacularly, and now every inmate in Millbrook knew that Crusher's reach had limits. Solitary was an 8 by 10-foot cell of concrete and steel. A narrow bed, a steel toilet, and walls that seemed to press inward with the weight of isolation. Most inmates emerged from solitary broken, their minds shattered by the crushing loneliness. Maya used the time to meditate, to center herself for what she knew would come next. Crusher couldn't let this stand. Gang leaders required constant reinforcement of their reputation, built on fear, and fear required spectacle. When Maya emerged from solitary 48 hours later, the prison felt different. Conversations stopped when she passed. Even the guards treated her with a cautious respect that hadn't been there before. Word of the library incident had spread beyond Millbrook's walls, carried by transferred inmates and visiting family members. Eddie was waiting in their cell, his face a mixture of relief and concern. Man, I thought they might never let you out. The whole block's been talking about what you did to Tank. Is it true he actually yielded to you? He made a smart choice, Maya replied, settling onto her bunk. Yeah, but Crusher's still planning his next move. He's called in favors from every gang in the prison, Aryan Brotherhood, Mexican Mafia, even some of the black gangs that usually don't work with whites. He's promising them territory, commissary money, whatever it takes. Maya nodded grimly. This was exactly what she had feared. Her actions in self-defense had escalated a simple bullying situation into something that could tear the entire prison apart. How many men is he gathering? 20, maybe 30. All serious players with nothing to lose. Maya closed her eyes and tried to find the center of calm that had sustained her through decades of training and combat. But for the first time since arriving at Millbrook, she felt the weight of genuine concern settling on her shoulders. 30 violent men, armed and organized, united by one goal. Even with all her training and experience, Maya knew that some battles couldn't be won through skill alone. The question wasn't whether she could survive what was coming. The question was how many others would be hurt in the process, and whether standing her ground was worth the price that others might pay. That evening, as word spread through every cell block, Maya sat quietly on her bunk, knowing that tomorrow would bring the storm to avoid. The she had been trying whispers carried details of Crusher's growing alliance, names of dangerous men from every corner of the prison who had agreed to participate in what was being called the biggest coordinated attack in Millbrook's history. Eddie paced nervously in their small cell, occasionally glancing at Maya with a mixture of awe and terror. Man, they're saying Crusher's got guys coming from maximum security, lifers with nothing to lose. Why don't you just ask for protective custody? Get transferred out of here? Maya looked up from the meditation pose she had assumed on her thin mattress. Running away doesn't solve the problem, Eddie. It just moves it somewhere else. But this isn't your fight anymore. This is war. It became my fight the moment I decided not to let Crusher pour garbage on my breakfast. Maya replied calmly. Everything that's happened since then has been a consequence of that choice. Eddie stopped pacing. There was something in Maya's voice, a certainty that spoke of a woman who had faced impossible odds before and found a way through them. You really think you can take on 30 guys? Maya was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. When I was younger, I might have believed I could. Age teaches you humility. But sometimes you don't fight because you think you can win. You fight because it's the right thing to do. The lights went out at 10 sharp, plunging the cell block into darkness. But sleep wouldn't come easily tonight. Tomorrow, reckoning that Hea would bring had been building since the moment Maya Rodriguez first walked into that cafeteria and refused to be intimidated. In cells throughout D Block, men lay awake planning violence. Some were motivated by loyalty to Crusher, others by the promise of reward, still others by the simple desire to be part of something bigger than themselves. But they all shared one thing in common. They had never faced anyone like Captain Maya Rodriguez, and tomorrow, they would learn exactly what that meant. The morning of the attack came with an eerie stillness that every seasoned inmate recognized. It was the kind of quiet that preceded bloodshed, when even the air seemed to hold its breath. Maya rose at her usual time, but today felt different. The weight of what was coming pressed down on the entire block like a storm front moving in. Eddie hadn't slept. His eyes were red-rimmed and darting, checking the cell door every few minutes as if expecting it to explode inward at any moment. "They're coming today," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Everyone knows it. The whole prison's on edge." Maya nodded slowly, folding her blanket with the same methodical precision she had maintained every morning for months. Then today, we find out what we're really made of. As the cell doors opened for morning count, the usual shuffle of feet and murmur of voices was replaced by an unnatural silence. Inmates moved carefully, keeping their heads down, sensing that something explosive was about to happen. Even the most hardened criminals knew when to stay out of the way. Maya walked toward the cafeteria with measured steps, her breathing controlled, her mind centered. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, some filled with curiosity, others with fear, and more than a few with the hungry anticipation of spectators waiting for bloodsport. The cafeteria felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Crusher sat at his usual table, but today he wasn't alone. The faces surrounding him told the story of every alliance he had forged, every favor he had called in, every threat he had made to assemble this army. Aryan Brotherhood soldiers with swastika tattoos sat beside Mexican mafia enforcers with dead eyes. Black gang members who had set aside their usual hatred of Crusher's crew for the promise of territory and respect. Lifers from maximum security who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Maya took her tray and found an empty table in the center of the room. Not hiding in a corner, not seeking protection near the guards, but right in the middle where everyone could see her, where there was nowhere to run. She understood the psychology of what was happening. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about power, reputation, and the delicate balance that kept this place from exploding into chaos. The attack came without warning. Crusher's signal was subtle, just a slight nod of his head, but it unleashed pandemonium. Men rose from tables throughout the cafeteria, moving with coordinated precision toward the woman sitting calmly with her breakfast tray. What happened next would be whispered about in prisons across 3 states for decades to come. Maya moved like water flowing around stones, her body shifting and turning with fluid grace that seemed to defy physics. The first attacker's shiv thrust met empty air as Maya stepped aside, her palm striking with surgical precision at nerve clusters that dropped the man instantly. 2 more came from her left, swinging makeshift weapons with lethal intent. Maya ducked low, swept one man's legs, and used his falling body to block the other's strike. Her elbow found ribs. Her knee found a solar plexus. Both attackers crumpled. The room erupted into complete chaos as more men joined the assault. But Maya was no longer fighting individuals. She was fighting the mob itself, using their numbers against them, turning their aggression into a weapon that struck down their own allies. A man with a razor-wire whip lashed out at her face. Maya caught the wire barehanded, ignoring the cuts that opened across her palm, and yanked the attacker forward into her rising knee. The impact lifted him off his feet. Another came from behind with a sock full of batteries. Maya sensed him coming, spun, and drove her fingers into pressure points along his neck. He collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. The coordinated assault began to break down as men got in each other's way. Maya exploited every opening, every moment of confusion. Her movements were poetry written in violence, each technique flowing seamlessly into the next. A massive man with arms covered in prison tattoos grabbed for her throat. Maya slipped his grip, trapped his arm, and used his own momentum to send him crashing through a table. Wood splintered, metal bent. The sound echoed like gunshots. Decades of training had prepared her not just for combat, but for this exact moment when skill would face overwhelming odds and emerge victorious through pure discipline and understanding. Every strike was calculated. Every movement had purpose. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary violence. A young gang member, barely 20, rushed her with a homemade knife. Maya could have killed him easily, but instead she disarmed him with a gentle redirect that sent the weapon flying while leaving him unharmed but stunned. Even in the midst of this chaos, she maintained her principles. The tide began to turn as more attackers fell than remained standing. Men who had entered the fight confident in their numbers now looked around nervously, seeing their allies scattered across the floor like broken dolls. Crusher himself finally entered the fray, roaring with rage as he charged across the cafeteria. His massive frame moved with surprising speed, but Maya was ready for him. She had been ready since that first day when he poured garbage on her food. He swung his fist with enough force to cave in a skull. Maya wasn't there when it arrived. She had moved inside his reach, too close for his size advantage to matter. Her palm struck his chest with perfect technique, disrupting his breathing and sending him staggering backward. But Crusher was tough, tougher than the others. He recovered quickly and came again, this time with a broken chair leg as a weapon. Maya danced around his strikes, each swing missing by inches, until she found her opening. Her fingers struck nerve points along his arm with machine-like precision. The makeshift club fell from his suddenly nerveless fingers. Before he could react, Maya's foot swept his legs, sending him crashing to the floor for the second time in 3 days. This time, he didn't get back up. Guards rushed in with riot gear, but they found something they had never seen before. One woman standing calmly in the center of a room filled with groaning, defeated attackers. Maya's orange jumpsuit was torn and stained with blood, but most of it wasn't hers. Her breathing was steady. Her hands were at her sides. She looked like someone who had just finished a routine workout, not someone who had single-handedly defeated 30 of the most dangerous men in the prison system. Crusher lay unconscious among the overturned tables. His grand alliance was shattered along with his reputation. The king of D-Block had been dethroned not by another gang leader, but by a woman who had simply refused to be intimidated. The aftermath was swift and brutal in its efficiency. Maya was immediately placed in solitary confinement pending investigation. The injured were taken to the medical ward. The cafeteria was closed for 3 days while crews repaired the damage. But the real damage couldn't be repaired with new tables and fresh paint. The power structure that had governed Millbrook for years had been obliterated in 15 minutes of controlled violence. Every understumate in the prison nowed a fundamental truth. There were levels of dangerous they had never imagined. In the weeks that followed, stories about Maya Rodriguez spread like wildfire through the prison system. Guards who had been there described what they saw with awe and disbelief. Inmates who witnessed it firsthand became minor celebrities, their accounts growing more elaborate with each telling. Some said she moved like a ghost, appearing and disappearing at will. Others claimed she could kill a man with a single touch. The truth was both simpler and more impressive. She was exactly what she appeared to be, a highly trained professional who had spent decades mastering the art of combat. But Maya didn't seek recognition or fear. When she was released from solitary 2 weeks later, she returned to her quiet routine. Library visits, exercise periods, meals eaten in contemplative silence. She had made her point, and now she wanted nothing more than to serve her time in peace. The respect she commanded was absolute but unspoken. Inmates stepped aside when she walked the corridors. Conversations quieted when she entered a room. Even the guards treated her with a deference usually reserved for visiting officials. Crusher, meanwhile, had lost everything. His crew disbanded, his territory divided among others, his reputation in ruins. He kept to himself, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might remind him of his humiliation. Some said the fight had broken something inside him. Others believed it had finally taught him humility. Maya never spoke about what happened that day. When pressed by curious inmates or investigating officials, she simply said it was self-defense, and nothing more. But those who knew how to look could see the truth in the precise way she moved, the controlled power that radiated from her even in repose. She was a weapon disguised as a woman, a warrior pretending to be a prisoner. And now that everyone knew what she was capable of, they also understood what she had been holding back all along. The lesson echoed through every cell block, every corridor, every corner of Millbrook Correctional Facility. Never judge someone by their appearance. Never assume that quiet means weak. And never, ever mistake restraint for inability. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who looks like they don't belong there at all. Sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones who choose not to fight until the moment comes when they have no other choice. Maya Rodriguez had given them all a masterclass in controlled violence, but more importantly, she had shown them what true strength looked like. It wasn't about dominating others or building empires of fear. It was about knowing who you are and never letting anyone take that from you. The woman who had walked into that cafeteria months ago as prey had revealed herself to be the apex predator. And now, finally, she could eat her breakfast in peace. But the real transformation was just beginning. Word of Maya's victory didn't just spread through Millbrook. It reached the outside world. Prison rights activists, military veterans groups, and journalists began asking questions about how a decorated Army captain had ended up in a men's facility in the first place. The investigation that followed would expose corruption that ran deeper than anyone imagined. Phone records showed bribes. Email chains revealed cover-ups. The same lawyers who had framed Maya were connected to a network that had been manipulating the justice system for years, targeting veterans and minorities who couldn't fight back through traditional channels. Maya's case became the keystone that brought it all crashing down. But inside Millbrook, she remained focused on something more immediate. The young inmates who approached her with desperate eyes and broken spirits. "Teach us," they whispered during library visits. "Show us how to be strong like you." Maya had spent her career training soldiers, but these soldiers were kids who had made mistakes, men who had lost their way, human beings who deserved a chance at redemption. Against her better judgment, she began holding informal sessions in the library. Not combat training, something deeper. Strength isn't about winning fights, she told a circle of men who ranged from teenage car thieves to middle-aged addicts. It's about controlling yourself when everything inside you wants to explode. She taught them breathing techniques she had learned in the military, meditation practices that helped quiet the rage and numb their dazed fear, that poise principles, basic, of respect for themselves and others, that could transform how they moved through the world. The sessions grew. Men who had been enemies found themselves sitting side by side, learning from someone who had faced their worst impulses and emerged victorious. Gang affiliations began to matter less. Violence in the block decreased dramatically. Even the guards noticed the change. "It's like she cast a spell on this place," Sergeant Williams confided to his supervisor. "We've had more peaceful weeks since she arrived than in the previous 2 years combined." But Maya's influence extended beyond the walls of D-Block. Her lawyer, working pro bono after learning about her case through the media coverage, had uncovered evidence that would not only clear her name, but expose the conspiracy that had put her there. Security footage from the night of the incident, footage that had mysteriously disappeared during her trial, surfaced from a backup server. It showed Maya arriving at the scene after the attack had already begun. Interv was womaning to save a who being brutalized by three men with criminal records spanning decades. The attackers' connections to the law firm that had prosecuted Maya came to light. Money had changed hands. Witnesses had been intimidated. Evidence had been suppressed. The case against Maya Rodriguez hadn't just been weak. It had been fabricated from the ground up. As her appeals moved through the courts, Maya continued her quiet revolution inside Millbrook. The meditation classes had evolved into something more comprehensive. Men were learning conflict resolution, anger management, and basic life skills that could help them succeed on the outside. Eddie had become one of her most dedicated students. The nervous man who had once cowered in their shared cell now carried himself with quiet dignity. "You saved my life," he told her one evening. "Not from Crusher or his crew, from myself. I was drowning in here, and you threw me a lifeline." The transformation wasn't universal. Some inmates resented Maya's influence, seeing it as weakness or manipulation. A few guards worried that her methods were too lenient, that she was coddling criminals who deserved punishment, but the results spoke for themselves. Recidivism rates among inmates who participated in Maya's programs dropped by 60%. Violence in D-Block reached historic lows. Men who had spent years consumed by hatred and desperation began talking about futures beyond these walls. The irony wasn't lost on Maya. She had been sent to prison for defending someone, and now she was defending dozens of people, from themselves, from the system that had failed them, from the cycles of violence and despair that trapped so many behind bars. Her final hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in October. The evidence was overwhelming. The conspiracy had been exposed. Justice, delayed but not denied, was finally within reach. The night before her hearing, Maya sat in the library where so much of her transformation had taken place. Men who had become her students stopped by to wish her well. Some brought drawings they had made. Others shared poems they had written. A few simply sat in comfortable silence, grateful for the time they had spent learning from someone who had refused to let this place break her spirit. "What happens to us when you leave?" Eddie asked. The question carried weight beyond its simple words. These men had found something precious in Maya's teachings. Hope. The fear that it would disappear with her departure was palpable. Maya closed the book she had been reading and looked around at the faces that had become familiar over these long months. "What happens to you is what you decide happens to you," she said softly. "Everything I've taught you lives inside you now. You don't need me to access it." She stood and addressed the group that had gathered. "I won't lie to you. This place will try to drag you back down. It will whisper that you're nothing but your worst moments, that you don't deserve better, that change is impossible. But you know different now. You felt what it's like to be in control of yourself. Don't let anyone, not the guards, not other inmates, not the voice in your own head, take that away from you." The hearing lasted less than 2 hours. The judge, faced with overwhelming evidence of prosecutorial misconduct and judicial manipulation, had no choice but to vacate Maya's conviction. The charges were dismissed with prejudice. She was free to go. But freedom felt strange after months of confinement. As Maya walked out of Millbrook's gates, carrying the same small bag she had brought in, she felt the weight of responsibility for men she was the leaving behind. The weight mediated outside, hungry for quotes about her ordeal. Lawyers wanted to discuss civil suits against the system that had wronged her. Veterans groups offered support and resources for rebuilding her life. Maya declined most interviews, but she did make one statement. "I went into that prison believing I was the victim of an injustice. I was right about that. But I came out understanding that I wasn't the only victim, and injustice wasn't the only thing that happened in there. Sometimes the worst circumstances can become the foundation for the most important work you'll ever do." 3 months after her release, Maya received a letter from Eddie. He was being released on parole, had a job lined up at a construction company, and was planning to continue the meditation practices she had taught him. "I'm not the same person who went into that cell scared and broken," he wrote. "I know who I am now, and I know I can handle whatever comes next." More letters followed. Men who had been released were staying out of trouble, finding work, rebuilding relationships with families they had lost. The programs Maya had started were continuing, run by inmates who had learned her methods and were passing them on to newcomers. Maya eventually returned to teaching, but not in the military. She opened a nonprofit focused on prison reform and veteran rehabilitation. Her experience at Millbrook had shown her that the skills she had learned in the service, discipline, leadership, the ability to remain calm under pressure, were exactly what the justice system needed. The corruption that had sent her to prison became the subject of federal investigations. Dozens of cases were overturned. The law firm responsible was disbanded, its partners facing criminal charges of their own. The ripple effects of Maya's fight for justice touched hundreds of lives, but perhaps the most important legacy of her time at Millbrook wasn't the legal victories or the systemic changes. It was the quiet transformation of men who had learned that strength wasn't about dominance or fear. It was about knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone, whether they wear a uniform or orange jumpsuit, take that knowledge away from you. Years later, when people asked Maya about her time in prison, she would smile and say something that surprised them. "I thought I was going there to serve time. Instead, I learned that time was serving me." Every day was an opportunity to choose who I wanted to be, regardless of the circumstances. That's a lesson you can't learn in any classroom. The woman who had walked into D Block as a victim of injustice had emerged as an agent of transformation. She had faced the worst the system could throw at her, and responded not with bitterness or revenge, but with the kind of quiet dignity that changes everything it touches. In the end, Maya Rodriguez had done more than survive her imprisonment. She had turned it into a masterclass on what it means to be truly free, even when you're locked behind bars. And that lesson, carried forward by dozens of men whose lives she had touched, would echo through the prison system for generations to come. The bullies who had tried to break her spirit had instead unleashed something they never expected. Proof that no bars are strong enough to contain a person who knows their own worth. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't won through violence or vengeance, but through the simple act of refusing to become what others expect you to be. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do to a corrupt system is to show people that change is possible. One person, one choice, one moment of quiet courage at a time. Maya Rodriguez stood at the window of her nonprofit office, watching as another group of formerly incarcerated veterans filed into the building for their weekly meeting. Some walked with the careful posture of men still adjusting to freedom. Others carried themselves with newfound confidence, their shoulders straight, their eyes clear. But today was different. Today, Maya was expecting someone special. The call had come 3 days earlier, a voice she recognized instantly, though it carried weight it hadn't possessed months ago. "Ms. Rodriguez? This is Eddie Martinez. I know you probably don't remember me, but we shared some time together at Millbrook." Maya had smiled, settling back in her chair. "I remember you, Eddie. How are you doing?" "Better than I ever possible thought. Mob and clean 'em. I've for 8 months now. Got a steady. The job. To my daughter again." But talking that even's not why I'm calling. Start a pause that followed carried significance Maya could feel through the phone line. "There's someone you need to meet. Someone who's been asking about you. Her name is Detective Sarah Chen, and she's been investigating something that connects back to your case. Something big." Now, watching through her office window as a woman in a dark suit approached the building, Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with unfinished business. Detective Chen moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the surroundings with professional awareness. The meeting was arranged for after hours, when the building would be empty except for Maya and her most trusted staff member, a former Marine named Jackson, who handled security and outreach. Maya had learned to be careful about who she trusted and when. Detective Chen was younger than Maya had expected, probably early 30s, with the kind of focused intensity that came from years of working cases that mattered. She accepted Maya's offer conference room, EE's. Ms. balanced the small ad on her KN of coffee and sat across from her in thick folder. Rodriguez, I want to start by saying that what happened to you was a travesty. The corruption investigation that grew out of your case has already resulted in 17 convictions. And we're not yet done. Maya nodded slowly. I appreciate that, detective, but something tells me that's not why you're here. Chen's smile was grim. You're right. I'm here because your case was just the beginning. We've uncovered a network that goes deeper than anyone imagined. And right now, there are 3 other women sitting in men's facilities across the state, all of them framed by the same people who went after you. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She had known her case wasn't isolated, but hearing it confirmed brought back memories of those first terrifying nights at Millbrook. The fear and confusion of being trapped in a system designed to break her. Tell me about them, Maya said quietly. Detective Chen opened her folder and Maria, former Santos, 30, spread 3-4 photographs across the table. Army medic, convicted of assault after she intervened in a domestic violence situation. The victim she saved has since recanted her testimony, claiming she was coerced. Maya studied the photograph. Maria Santos had the same look Maya remembered seeing in her own mirror during those early days at Millbrook. Defiant but scared, strong but vulnerable. Jennifer Williams, 28, former Air Force security specialist, convicted of battery after a bar fight, where she defended a college student from sexual assault. The supposed victim has connections to the same law firm that prosecuted you. The second photograph showed a young black woman with close-cropped hair and eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. And Lisa Park, 41, former Navy intelligence officer, convicted of aggravated assault for allegedly attacking a man in a parking garage. What the jury didn't hear was that the man had been stalking her teenage daughter for months. Maya felt her hands clench involuntarily. 3 women, 3 veterans, 3 lives destroyed by the same corrupt system that had nearly broken her. Where are they now? Maya asked. Santos is at Riverside State, Williams is at Oakwood Correctional, and Park is at Iron Mountain. All maximum security facilities, all places where women shouldn't be, facing dangers they shouldn't have to face. Detective Chen leaned forward, her voice dropping. But's what makes here this even worse. We have evidence that suggests these transfers weren't accidents or bureaucratic errors. They were intentional. Someone wanted these women isolated, vulnerable, unable to fight back through normal channels. Maya stood and walked to the window, staring out at the street where men who had found their way back to productive lives were heading home to families and futures they had thought were lost forever. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her wrongful imprisonment had led to the most meaningful work of her life. But these other women were still trapped in the nightmare she had escaped. What do you need from me? Maya asked. We need someone who understands the system from the inside. Someone who knows how to survive in those places and how to help others do the same. Most importantly, we need someone these women will trust. Chen pulled out another folder, thicker than the first. I've been in contact with advocacy groups, legal teams, journalists. Everyone agrees that the fastest way to get these women the help they need is to expose what's happening to them. But that means getting their stories, documenting the conditions they're facing, building public pressure for immediate transfers to appropriate facilities. Maya turned back to face the detective. You want me to go back inside? Not as an inmate, as a civilian contractor, prison reform consultant, educational program coordinator, whatever title gets you through the doors. You've already proven that you can create change from within the system. These women need someone who understands what they're going through. The proposal was audacious and risky. Maya had built a good life for herself since her release. Her nonprofit was thriving, her reputation was restored, her future was bright. Going back inside those walls, even as a free person, meant reopening wounds that had finally begun to heal. But the photographs on the table told a different story. 3 women who were living the nightmare she had survived. 3 veterans who had served their country with honor, only to be betrayed by a system they had sworn to protect. Maya looked at those photographs one more time, seeing her own reflection in the eyes of women who deserved better. Women who had served with honor, only to be betrayed by the very system they had protected. The decision wasn't really a choice at all. "When do we start?" she asked, picking up Maria Santos's file. Detective Chen's smile was the first genuine one Maya had seen from her all evening. "Tomorrow. We've got 3 women counting on someone who understands their fight. Someone who knows that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who refuses to stay down." As Maya walked Detective Chen to the door, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a wrongfully convicted veteran to a woman who had turned her worst nightmare into her greatest purpose. The bullies who had tried to break her spirit had instead forged something unbreakable. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courtrooms or appeals. Sometimes it comes from people who've walked through hell and decided to go back for those still trapped inside. Maya Rodriguez had learned that lesson the hard way. Now she was ready to teach it to 3 more women who needed to remember that their worst day doesn't define their worth. The fight was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning.